So, welcome to this week's edition of the Redacted Culture Cast. Today, I am joined by Chris, who has a bit of an interesting story. We were able to meet under unexpected circumstances once again. Chris, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, Chris Fettes. Do you need a short bio, or is that? I answered the question. Chris Fettes.
That is who you are. All right. So, Chris, what do you do, and how did you get there?
Now I am the founder of my own ice cream company, which I'm growing. I just started that earlier in the spring, but it's moving along. I just recently secured a lease negotiation for a new shop. That's brand new, so it's going to give me some time to do some other things in the meantime, and try to get some local distribution type stuff going on. And then I'm also a co-owner of a security business focused on protective measures, training, and products towards threats to organizations. So like active shooter and other types of threats, lots of hate crimes going on against places of worship and stuff like that. So I kind of got into that honestly, I got into both of these things out of the requirement in my life to move away from doing the things that I don't necessarily care much about as far as purpose and working for other people, and into things that I do care deeply about and my own purpose. So that's really the goal underneath.
I look forward to unpacking that. So we've got a pipeline of entrepreneur. We've got a little bit of a training, instructing side. And you and I have had quite a few conversations, but for those of you who are listening, this is the Redacted Culture Cast. I am your host. Thank you for supporting us. We have just recently, at time of recording, we've recently just closed up another pre-order on the Subdued shirts. So
Yeah.
Thank you guys for supporting us there. We really did enjoy that. So we will be getting, by the time you're hearing this, they should be getting ready to be on their way. But you can, if you want to support the channel, you can head over to redactedllc.com. You can follow us on Instagram at redactedllc. Now on to the show. So Chris, one thing that you and I were talking about, and one thing that is important I think is an important kind of paradigm to set for many of the audience, because some of the audience comes from backgrounds similar to us, and some of them absolutely don't. And so being able to lay a foundation of like how we talk about certain things and where our conversation is coming from. You're coming from the SEALs and I'm coming from the Rangers. And while from my perspective, or my place of being a Ranger guy, we were told that we had a bit of a rivalry with you. And some of you guys were told that what? Say what?
And
of course.
So you grew to believe that, right?
Of course I believed it. I read Ruby Ridge.
Yeah.
Or Robert's Ridge, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, oops. So not a good one to mix up. But
Idiots.
Yeah, right. But needless to say, so one of the things that I appreciated about, and I grew to appreciate about where you came from, is that the organization as a whole seemed to be much more open to reaching outside of your, let's just say, your fence line to solve problems. Whereas Ranger Battalion tried to solve everything internally, and everything was isolated. So we had a fence that's blocked us off from everybody. Whereas you guys, if you needed something fixed or solved or corrected, they would send one of your guys to a company to go solve that problem, and we would wait for that company to come to us with a solution for a problem.
Yeah.
And then I think that translated to post-military life, where I want to hear more of your. I want your story to come out in this subject on how do you transition from being a warfighter to an ice cream maker?
Well, before that, I just had a thought about the point you just made, that reaching out, towards basically networking. And for sure, I can see that was a good point to notice. And on the more positive note of that, for sure, I think that the culture that I felt was like, we're sort of the redheaded stepchilds of soft, especially on the JSOC side of things, and even geographically detached from the rest of it. So it almost came out of necessity for that, where it's like, we don't have the ability to organically do everything. And so we almost have to reach out, and it sort of developed over time through the war machine to get really good at, procurement and acquisitions and solutions towards the problems, and then developing those solutions. So like, yeah, I definitely understand that point. And from your guys' side, being more organic to finding those solutions yourself is also an awesome thing. You know what I mean? So, but
yeah, you
right.
refer to you guys yourselves as the redheaded stepchild. I thought you guys were like the beloved son. I
Yeah,
thought Soft did everything to bend over backwards for you guys.
that was a good way to get, sort of play into the fact that we needed to get help for things, I guess.
Fair.
But maybe
Yeah.
it's just the perspective, right?
Yeah, no, that perspective shift is very different, because it's like, I always thought you guys were the celebrities, like not the rock stars, but like, oh yeah, it's them. Soft does anything they want, whereas we're like, hey,
Yeah.
Soft, hey JSOC, can we have functioning handguns? And they're like, maybe 1 in 10.
Just make them for yourself.
Yeah, right. Like, okay, I'm sorry, we got some private in the back room with like a forge and a billows, and there's just a team leader with a whip beating him, and there's another team leader. There's a spec 4. There's a tab spec 4 just hammering out upper receivers with like the Mines of Moria. That's Ranger Battalion right there.
Yeah. So even in the tight-knit sort of warrior communities of special forces at whatever level, even we are victims of the sort of concept of generalizing, right? Rangers are this, SEALs are that. So yeah, that's funny. But all right. So to the question, the way that I got into doing ice cream was that, and even my security business, this is getting easier for me to explain to people that don't understand, that aren't close to me, that sort of know the stories, is that I only at this point I have 2 skills in life, and it's tactics and ice cream, or I like to cook per se. So it stems out of that. And so the businesses literally portray my only skills in life. So everything that I've learned since sort of awakening to purpose and finding your purpose after losing such a profound purpose of being in special forces, is that it works best to strive towards what you're good at or what you do. So literally my 2 ventures are applied to my only 2 skills that I have. So but long story short, growing up, I was in the kitchen a lot. I was just drawn to my grandmother, who was an immigrant from Japan, and my mother, who, was the one that learned all of her recipes and cooking secrets, and is just sort of a home chef per se. Not formally trained or anything, but I learned all of that growing up. I saw it. I was always around it. And so ice cream, I've always had a sweet tooth. For better or for worse, I've had to really work on my sugar intake, because, if I would have continued on that path, I'd probably for sure have like type 2 diabetes right now. But so it's pretty funny when people are like, you must be just crushing your ice cream. Or like, I really only just taste a spoonful of my own ice cream and then move along to providing it to people. And that's really what I enjoy about it, is I'm providing what I have to people. Right. So at a certain point I had a machine. When I got into the Navy, I didn't take a machine on all my deployments. I actually only took them on a couple of them to use in case I had opportunities to find dairy and maybe some produce. And so that did happen a couple of times, and I was able to send terps out to the local market in like Afghanistan and a few times in Iraq to find local produce. They've got a lot of figs and clementines and apples and good things like that, and pomegranates, like whatever you find, cannabis fields, right?
True. I've seen them. I've
Yeah,
walked through them.
you walk through them. So I never made cannabis ice cream. I didn't want to get, but I definitely want to experiment with that maybe. But anyways,
yeah, while you're in, I think that's a stigma that even if it doesn't matter, you'd be like, oh,
Yeah,
he
it doesn't
made that. And suddenly you'd have some random, like, CIF person like, what are you doing here? Well, not CIF, that's gear, but whatever. Somebody would be investigating you. All of a sudden you're like, but
who's making this ice cream? This whole team must be eating it.
Yeah, it's like it was a joke. No one ate it, but fine. You know how it goes. Like the rumor gets out suddenly, and you don't know how or where. But now you've got some dude breathing down your neck, and you're like, "Geez, man."
Yeah, but just the fact that it was a rumor brought up at all. Screwed, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Now because then they have to find it because you're not gonna get an investigator to. Well, no, it's like it's the skeezy job that the problem that you run into is that they've invested this much into finding somebody who's done something wrong that when there's nothing there, they're like, well, it's a sunk cost problem.
Yeah.
It's the main issue with we do a mission where we'd be in a gunfight and we come home, we get back from the op and then we'd have a conversation with, we'd have to talk to like JAG and stuff about what would we do and what were our justified positions. And it's like, why is it that it took, we had like a 6-hour mission, like 30 minutes of it was a gunfight, and I have to sit and talk to you for 8 hours? I opened door, shot dude with RPK. That's what it was. Like, there's no long story to it. I opened the door, the dude had a belt fed, he was pointing it towards our dudes, I shot him, and that was it. Like, well, what was his demeanor? Dead. Yeah. So
you're like, what was the barista's demeanor at Starbucks when you ordered your coffee this morning? Do you remember?
Yeah, right. Did she froth your whip? Jeez.
Here's the sad thing too, is like that JAG is now looking forward to their fit rep being something they nail you with on something,
Yeah. Well,
anyways, but we're doing this podcast because you divulge or you tangent off just as much as I like to do. So
I think we'll do fine. The one thing I do need to get better off is staying on subject. And so
it's all
driving back into this thing. You presented it, you said it a certain way. You said, when I got out of when you were in the Navy, I want to address first while you're in the Navy, you brought an ice cream machine with you, so I want to start with that one. And then I want to get into, cause you said, and then when you got out of the Navy, now you have 2 skills. You can make ice cream and you can teach tactics, and you got tactics and ice cream. And the way that you phrased it made it sound like that was the limitation. Like you don't have, you're at a, you know that you have a reduced set of skill sets that are a reduced list of skill sets that have meaningful value to you: training, instructing, tactics, and ice cream. As opposed to this idea that you would like leave and you'd leave the Navy and you have this swath of options and skill sets that you could offer the world. And I know a lot of veterans feel that way, especially after they go off and they get called heroes and they do hard things. And you can go down this road all day long. And then they get back to the United States and I will include myself in this thing, sometimes have a hard time integrating with the world.
Yeah,
I want to tease into that one because I honestly don't know if I wouldn't keep it exclusive to veterans anymore. Maybe they definitely have their own participation, but I think for many of us in this world, especially in this culture, having integration into something is not easy to find. Perhaps a lot of our world is currently orchestrated or organized by intent or by accident.
Absolutely
against it in isolating fashion. So let's stick to Chris Fettes, resourcefulness. First of all, how did you bring in how big is an ice cream machine, and how did you get that overseas?
So I started out with a little Cuisinart machine, but we take those Pelican cases. So the one I ended up with was it's an Italian machine called a Lello Musso 5030. It makes about 2 quarts at a time. But it's a really awesome machine, but it's top fed. So the one thing that I wish they could change is that you have to get sort of scoop it out of the top as it gets finished. So the thing weighs about 50 pounds. I packed it in a mid-size Pelican case, and then when I brought that, obviously for me, I sacrificed my booze box or sort of some of my comfort items for deployment to bring in order to bring that and sort of pack around it. So I did bring it on most deployments. I just didn't have the opportunity always to use it. But when I did, it was awesome. Honestly, a little bit of that came out of insecurity, which goes a little bit even into a deeper topic of why I joined the teams in the first place. Most people will assume that it's out of like patriotism and stuff like that. But what I'm getting at is that there were actually a few times, one, when I augmented for Dev Group before I ever went through selection, it's almost like I was afraid to even break it out to make it known that I did this as a hobby in between missions and stuff. And we were at an outstation. There was actually plenty of stuff to use there, plenty of dairy and produce as I was on, like an agency compound, and they had everything they needed and wanted there. But because I was augmenting with these guys that I deeply cared about what they thought about me, and considering that I was going to screen for selection, I didn't even break it out. I just didn't want to bring any like extra attention on top of whatever my performance was on those missions. So there was a deployment or two where I didn't even bring. I brought it but didn't use it. Right. So there's a little bit deeper stuff to that. Like
when you're saying you didn't want to break it out, as in like you didn't want to go through training and have somebody go, "Oh, you're the ice cream guy," or is it?
I didn't want to be over on the operator task force side, side, and those guys be like, hey, it's the ice cream dude, or like not for like jokes aside, but I just really was really focused, a little stressed out about and nervous about like my performance with these tier 1 guys on missions, and so I just opted not to break it out and bring any. That probably could have been the same if I did anything else, if I played the guitar or if I did art or whatever it was, but that is more of a personal thing that I have since been able to release. I joined the teams truthfully out of a need, like a deep need for acceptance.
Okay.
From people. Yeah. And so growing up in a military family, it was honestly almost sort of not a traumatic event, but a culmination of traumatic feelings that I realized later, because as a kid, moving around every couple of years, you're making friends and then having to leave those friends and then go into a totally different place with different cultures, and try to fit in there. So it was almost like constantly shedding your identity to try to fit into a new group and change the way you look and the things you're interested in, and in a concerted effort to try your best to fit in all the time. Right. So knowing the deeper level of that now as an adult, and after being out of the teams, I realized that sort of became a complex for me over time. And so when 9/11 happened, that was just a catalyst for me. It was just an excuse for me to go say, hey, it's either like a gang or something, or now I have an opportunity to go try to be accepted by like the most elite of groups, one of the most elite of groups. And it was just totally random that it was by choice that I joined the Navy. And to be honest with you, the only reason that happened is because I remembered in high school at some point, a group of my friends, convinced that they were going to become Navy SEALs, and it's all that they ever talked about. So that was just sort of in my subconscious mind. It's the only one that I had ever heard of. So I went to the office and joined the Navy.
Okay, so from the outside looking in, I don't see. From the outside looking in, it's easy to depict the SEALs as being quite the opposite. And this is back to generalization, but being quite the opposite, and they're all very independent, kind of punk-esque. Not punk in the sense of like aesthetic purely, although you could find your own taste and touch.
Like counterculture a little bit or something.
Yeah, well, I think the reason why I'm saying that is that like Well, I'm struggling with this idea that I'm not struggling with it as it's hard to comprehend. I'm trying to build it up because you say you joined the SEALs out of a need for an acceptance. You wanted to be part of a group. You wanted to have the most elite people that you knew accept you as one of theirs. So you said, shed your skin and become like them, which is kind of the polar opposite of how I remember SEALs functioning, as in like, each one of you was so much of your own self. There's a lot of charisma that you could see.
Yeah.
You'd think so, right? And I know that I'm generalizing, but I'm trying to. Well, the reason why I'm trying to bring this up is that I think that idea that you could pursue the way that you said pursuing. How do I say it? Like acceptance within the SEALs is so antithetical to how everything has been depicted throughout my life. When I mean this is like, I remember as a kid where the main ethos of every TV show was the weird kid can be cool too. And like, it was be yourself, be the best that you can be. This was the army. The army's ad was narcissistic. It was be all you can be instead of like join the team, make the sacrifice. And so like, so so when you make this idea, you say something like, well, I needed to get rid of everything that was me so that I could be a SEAL. I'm making a bit of an exaggeration.
Yeah,
it sounds so counter and antithetical to everything that we've been talking about, right?
SEAL teams for the need for validation and acceptance. So I can say that now. But it's true for me. I can't speak for anybody else, and for sure, I definitely know that you're right about some of those of what you're saying, where you've got all of these boisterous personalities and guys that seem so much like themselves that they've brought into the military, and like no amount of indoctrination to the military stopped them from sort of exuding these personalities, which is definitely true. But I don't know how many other people are like me, but for sure it's something that I realized at like 36 years old, after I got out of the Navy, or 38 years old, right? When I was able to sort of figure out the path towards like healing from both, the negative parts of, like combat and childhood.
Yeah. So can we hold on to that and kind of leave a note? Because there's this need for acceptance, this need for validation and acceptance, where it has been most apparent, in my observation, is people who wanted to join the military, but for one reason or another couldn't. Yeah. And sometimes some of those people have propelled that they, for some people, for many of these people actually, and this is something that I'll make an argument for many of the people who wanted to join the military, but through one circumstance or another were incapable of doing it and were earnest about that incapability. Like they received a medical injury, they had a medical injury, they had a medical condition. For many of those people, the experience of not being able to join the military was crushing. Yeah, it seems like it was crushing because they had kind of put their identity in becoming this thing. They were, and I honestly think a lot of us were looking for that need for validation and acceptance, and even the opportunity. They didn't even have a chance to open the door. The door was closed before they could open it up, and before they could walk into the hallway. And so, I think my observation of people, and is that although that experience was crushing for them, for many people, that experience drove them on to accomplish who they became. Yeah, and
absolutely
right. Whether it's in business or in friendship and relationship or whatever excellence that they're pursuing. So you could make the argument that, well, you always had something that was necessary, just this wasn't your path. Sure.
Yep.
But it was that need for validation and acceptance that has driven some people to their accomplishments, and one of them being yours, because it is an accomplishment to get into the SEALs. And especially as far as you did. So how do you describe that how did that need for validation and acceptance, how do you look back on it before you got into the SEALs? Did it change when you got there? Did it change again when you got to DevGru? And what did it look like after the service? And when did you like hone in on it? And then when did is there like a solution? Is this just human nature?
There's definitely a solution, in my opinion.
Okay.
We can get to that also. That's another talking point, I guess. But yes, it for sure changed a lot. It changed many times. And I should preface it with the fact that I grew up in a very loving family. My stepfather, who I consider my dad, when I was younger, I lived with my mom, who was a single mother until my sister was born, to my biological father, who, was an abusive alcoholic and eventually went away. And then my mom was able to find a really good man, and remarry. And we have a very close relationship now. So my point is that I grew up in a wonderful household. The trauma of the sort of like acceptance and validation problem developing over time literally came from moving around all the time. And, I don't know if you have any kids for us, but I've got an 8 and a 9-year-old, and I can already see like this is the age where their little egos start to develop. They start to care about what people think. My 9-year-old, when he was 8, didn't give a shit what people thought. That's when you see kids that are out just like dancing around and laughing and, doing whatever their mind wants them to do at it, like whatever they want to do, right, without caring. But so that's around the age that we were doing all this, where your ego sorts of started to develop, where you have this need to fit in and care what people think. You start caring about, my 9-year-old now cares about what his shoes look like and how his hair is done and all these kind of things. So this is actually a good thing, because now I can coach him through sort of the truth of what all those things mean, right? And like, yes, the ego is necessary, in order to survive in society comfortably, but it also doesn't matter what people think about you per se, right? Because the people that you love and the people that care about you don't mind what you do or what happens. So, but the point being that that's where it stemmed from, was moving around all the time, having to get made fun of in a new place, and then sort of adjust to what those kids in that environment preferred per se, changing my personal like style, I guess, to fit that, and then constantly having to do that over and over again, until we got to Monterey, California, which is where I went, started 9th grade. And it was just the place where we were able to spend the most time out of all of it. So I spent essentially 5 years there, from 9th grade until a year after graduating, before moving around California a little bit and 9/11 happening. So that's where it stemmed from. For sure, once I got through, and I just consider myself, I'm grateful that I was able to, and I think of it in a sort of accomplishment way also, but there's for sure some luck aspect to it there, that I was able to get through, two of the most difficult soft selections in the world, being Buds and Dev Group, and getting through, all of the tough courses, the sniper schools, the tandem bundle courses, and some of those longer, harder courses the first time. And that wasn't to say I wasn't on the chopping block a couple of times, but I'm just grateful that I was able to get through it all the first time. So that being said, for sure, that problem within me changed over time. It definitely became more of a sense of patriotic duty after that, because once I made it, and once I had the opportunity to prove myself. And even with, you know this too, that within the soft units, you don't just get there and you're accepted and validated. Like you still have to perform, right? And if you have a chance, especially during the GWAT, to, your deployments is going to be, there was a good chance that you were going to have a really active deployment, right? That was your opportunity. And then once some shit happened and you performed well, you can kind of sort of come back. And that was the first sigh of relief for me, which was like, okay, my platoon, we performed combat together. There was like plenty of instances, things that happened that I, essentially I was deemed a good operator per se among my peers. And so that was the first moment in all of that time that I really remember kind of taking a breath and going like, I'm accepted and validated and I can just kind of be myself. Right. And so that sort of paved the way for the rest of my career to where I could actually be more of myself. Right. And that's not to say that things didn't change later through some of the combat stress and, the formulation of addictions and other bad habits to sort of escape your personal problems. So that's sort of how it changed. It morphed into that. That cycle sort of started again when it was time to go through selection for dev group. And
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I don't want to stop. I want to start there again, but it's interesting. Before we dive into the restart of the cycle, so there was a time you brought up where you childhood, entered the Navy, you had your first selection, you passed buds, and I'm sure there was some sense of was that, or did that actually function as a rite of passage for you? Did it at the time? Did you recognize it as one?
I did, and then later
Okay.
realizing that it was only among the peers that were around me, essentially
Yes.
the guys in my class per se, right?
Yes. So only the guys in your class, and then you got to teams, and that first real combat deployment. That was another one where because I did not have that experience. I had a very different one.
Gotcha.
And some of it is our RIP selection was a joke.
Yeah.
Now I say that as if I was robbed of something, and I recognize that that's probably not a healthy way to deal with it, to be honest. But our Ranger selection was people have heard me talk about it on the show already, but it was, we had basically everybody passed kind of thing. It was the opposite of what we expected. Like, was it difficult? Yeah, but like it was not. There was a lot of people that. Okay, moving on.
No, exactly what you're saying. There is for sure an upside to it being difficult and actually you seeing other people either quitting or not making it through. There's some rite of passage that you expected that just didn't satisfy you.
Yeah, well, and this has been a continual issue in other ways, but like a normal RIP class had 125 guys and graduated with like 25 to 30. We started with like 315 and graduated 285. So basically, they're just like, okay, do you have a pulse? Can you run 5 miles? That will let the team leaders sort you out, which creates a very antagonistic relationship between the team leaders and the new privates. Yeah. And it's fine. It happened. But then I remember my first, like, I had our first deployments, and like I didn't return as like a good operator. We had a lot of division in that at that time. There's a lot of things going on, and it was like it took time for me to make my way and make my place. But the point that I'm saying is that I'm looking back and saying part of the challenge that I had as an individual is I was constantly begging for some form of rite of passage so that I made it. And it never really comes. Like, that's not something that I don't know if I guess maybe I'm not saying it doesn't come, but like I got the impression that waiting for some sort of quote unquote rite of passage to define you as an individual is a dangerous and fleeting perspective to hold that leaves you looking for the world to validate your existence. I'm getting off track. Whereas you're telling your story where you had events where you said, we got back from our first combat deployment and I had a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
So how can you define that a little bit better, or not better? Can you define that a little bit more? And
so, like, it's almost selfish to say a little bit when I think about it, but at the same time, because some I had teammates that we lost in an IED strike on that deployment, and some other things happened. It was a really, honestly, out of all of my 8 combat deployments, that was the most intense, out of all of them, including the dead group one. So it was just intense. And so I guess that when I came back, yes, I had lots of emotions and feelings towards what happened and towards other elements of the deployment, but inside I actually felt really good, and actually now, I feel bad saying that because I do still have some teammates from that deployment that are for sure out there, still attached to the events of that night where we got struck by the IED, that are still for sure traumatized by it. And I can just tell, by I just know it, just by knowing them. And that was in 2007. So that was a while ago, but, I guess that I can remember coming back from that deployment and feeling good, because my internal need for that validation and acceptance was satisfied at that point.
Okay.
Right. So I worked through later on these sort of developed emotions and sort of trauma from that combat.
Mm-hmm.
But even the compilation of all the combat I've been in, all the good things and bad things and everything that's happened, we're kind of used to, and you probably know this too, is it's a small community here in Virginia Beach. We've got 2 sides of town. We've got the Little Creek team side of town. We've got the Deb Group team side of town, and all of the people that have ever been involved with it are here. So it's hard to describe that, but I don't know how to describe what I'm trying to say. That feeling of validation and acceptance over time for sure was satisfied for me. And then I had it sort of evolved and changed. And now almost is I guess I never, when I figured out how to move forward with finding purpose now and getting past those deeply depressive feelings of losing purpose, of being sort of wrapped up in my addictions and the things, my sort of shitty habits and projecting that on my family and people around me, to how sort of miserable, for lack of better words, that I felt on other people, and recognizing that and then deciding to do something about that. I don't recall a lot of the combat trauma being a major factor in that. It was all more of the acceptance and validation thing that stemmed from childhood and other things as well, for me. And the combat sort of trauma of it was actually a little bit easier to deal with after that. It's I can understand it more, right? And it became less of a intrusive thing on my life where it was I'm attached to this identity as this veteran that's been through all of this and lost friends and seen some, crazy shit on deployments. And once I did that, I have to say the migraines and the nightmares about shit just kind of stopped happening. But at the same time, I realized that those weren't the root cause of what I was feeling.
I have some connection to you in that one, in the sense of the nightmares that I have I'm maybe not connection, but I can say, what does this sound like? The nightmares that I have about being in the military are almost never about combat. They're usually about something banal, like packing a rucksack and not being able to do it.
And then it's it's like that dream when you were a kid and you're in school and you go why am I I have no pants right now? And waiting for that moment for everybody around me to realize it. And then when they realize it, that's the nightmare, and then you wake up. It's this, like,
I was homeschooled, so I don't have the experience, but
it's like you're on a helicopter, you get off and you realize you forgot your gun, right? And you're trying to figure out how to remedy that problem, right?
yeah, the whole dream is this, like, you're in a gunfight without a gun and you're looking for one and you're like digging in the dirt and you're trying, and then you get one and you can't, it has the wrong bullets.
Yeah. You go to the comms guy or whoever, support guy that you're nicest to, and be like, just can I borrow your for real quick, and then I'll sneak it back to you,
Goofy stuff like that. So, but the point being said is that, like, in Hollywood and depictions and even because we were having a small discussion about the VA
always
before,
the explosions and the gruesome stuff that happens that you think would be the deep
traumatizing. Yeah, it's
the things that you actually dwell about in your subconscious mind or your conscious mind.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to say the one thing that I dwelled on the most was being accepted and having a place. Like, I just wanted to arrive and be done, like, with the measuring, the dick measuring and the arguments, and like, and some of that was just pure hubris. Like, I will admit it in that sense. It was very much so. Even when I was in the good graces of the battalion, there was the part of me on the inside that was like, I joined the Rangers to become part of the team and become a Ranger. And then when I was there, I just wanted them to recognize me as an individual. So, like, I wanted to become a number and a team. I sacrificed, I quote unquote sacrificed, the self-expression of college, because I was even looking at, like, kind of going down the art route. I sacrificed the self-expression of college to join the mill of the military, to, like, be a part of, to submit myself to the tribe of Ranger Battalion. And as soon as I got there, I just wanted them to see me as an individual. And it's like, wow.
Yeah. And you can even pick that apart further and go, like, that need or that nightmare of being sort of like the guys that ever went through that were sort of labeled, right? And I hate labeling now, but that were sort of, like, labeled as the shitbag. Like, that was the nightmare for me. You know what I mean?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Which is funny because that only extends to the guys in your small team, right? In your unit around you, your platoon, or your whatever you call it.
But you don't know that. But you don't know that. You can't know that, right? Because they're the only people whose opinion matters.
Exactly.
I don't care what the sergeant major of Fort Benning thinks about me. I don't care at all. What I really do care about is, does my squad leader and my team leader think I'm a turd?
That could form into sort of a toxicity in your life too, as you go through your experience in those teams. Like, I cared less about what my family thought about me than my teammates, and, like, maybe it has to be that way. I haven't really delved that deeply into that, but for sure that became a problem later once I did have a family.
Okay, that is I cared more about what my team thought about me than what my family thought about me. Sounds like something somebody would say, but not actually mean. I'm not criticizing. I'm not throwing you under the bus on this one. It's that, like, that it's not that it's patronizing. It's that what does that look like? What did you mean by that? Because in for some people, right, what you spend your time on is what you prioritize. That's an easy assessment of what you can say. But also, you could say, well, how did you come to understand that, and where did it make sense, and where did you change, and like,
absolutely. And I accept that criticism because we could think of it at different levels. Like, there's levels to everything. Of course, I deeply cared about and loved my family, right? But in the external circumstances around me, I made decisions based off of what my teammates cared about me over, and to include spending time, to, like all kinds of things. But, and I have to say also that everything we're talking about is for sure, I'm referring to myself and not assuming that was that way for anybody else that was ever in the teams.
I understand that, and I think, and the people who listen to the show generally, I'm not worried that. I don't think that we do ourselves any service by assuming the lowest common denominator amongst our communities, right? I don't think we do ourselves a service. I know that we're talking to you. You're an individual. You had your stories.
Mm-hmm.
So let's carry on. I'm not worried about people making assumptions because you can't help them anyway.
Yeah, that's what we've agreed to do this. And that's why I love your podcast. But
thank you.
You're welcome. Where that stopped was as I matured through my time in the teams and started to be able to realize this for what it was through my own ego, right? Because here's the other thing about ego is that we already have our sort of baseline ego, like wherever you were as an individual before the teams, and then I almost like developed a secondary ego on top of that in order to survive in the teams per se, right? And that was really the hardest part about getting out and realizing that I had both of those to cut through to find out all the truth within myself in order to fix it, right? Or go the other direction, which is why we have a huge problem with, like veteran suicide and these kind of things. Like it literally is a path that goes two directions, and it's a choice, in my opinion, based off of your environment and circumstances. So as I went through and sort of recognized that I didn't understand the full problem within myself, I just realized how unhappy my family and the people I cared about were around me and how happy I was within myself. And so in 2016, at the later end of a Somalia deployment, I decided I was getting out to try to essentially figure this out. At the time, I was like, this is the fix. I got to get out and everything will be fine. And then it's a process of learning that's not the end all be all solution. And then that's the hard part, because guys, just before they get out, I've sort of, my opinion or what I see is they go, getting out is going to solve something within myself, like all of these sort of problems or this shitty feeling, this compilation, this generally unwell feeling, right? For me, it was like there's this dark creature going on inside me. I later realized that that's just my ego, right? Was that what I see is guys about to get out going like, okay, my job is so important because, what I do and how much money I make and where I live, all of these external things to yourself are what is going to solve the problem. And then when it doesn't, it's very difficult to deal with. And that's the point where you reach that fork in the road where you have to make a decision to figure that out or to continue on the path that's not making you feel any better.
This fork in the road is very often this fork in the road is sort of the choice between nihilism and work, I guess. Is that how you're making the argument? Like because it's not, when you're talking about working on yourself in the sense, you're talking about looking into yourself, finding a problem and fixing it, right? As opposed to letting your true self be known, whatever that is. Like, I think, am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah.
Because
definitely.
If I'm going to dig into myself and find problems, I need to, and I'm not I can do that without being intent to solve them. Correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
You don't have to
them to be validated or something. I want the world to validate my existence. It's like,
Yeah, but for me, what I understand of it now is that you just need to validate yourself. You just need to, it's all within you. It's all within you. And so like knowing you for sure, maybe a bit of nihilism or some other words to describe that sort of empty feeling inside. And, like whether you're religious or spiritual at all, or not, the fact is that it's all a matter of your own perspective on how, like what reality is around you. Right. So I try my best to keep my opinions, I guess, about religions out of it. But what I can say is like that actually is a good point. One of the huge differences between what I feel like I am now, which is more in tune with my true self. Like now I've shed that acceptance and validation problem because I don't need it anymore. And I also understand where it came from. So it just allows me to have more of a a fresh understanding of what's going on in any moment, right? Inside of me and outside of me. But with religion, that's a good point, because I had a really deep talk with one of my great friends who's Catholic here in Virginia Beach, and I go to, I was going to church with him sometimes, and he couldn't understand how like not being not Catholic growing up. We are a Catholic family now. My wife is Catholic, and I've agreed to at least raise our kids Catholic to the point that they have a choice what to believe or whatever, right? That's another separate discussion. But my point being that, like, I can go to anybody's church at this point. I don't care what religion you are, and I can see into all of the concepts that I understand are at this point, and then all of the sort of fine details of things that I might not necessarily agree with or understand, I just can let go of those without judgment. And in my opinion, the positive side of thinking of that is, like, every religion is correct. They're all correct, right? And then when you get into the sort of doctrine and rules of each religion, that's where it kind of strays for me as far as correctness or not, right? On a deeper level.
Yeah. So I think I want to hold on to this one and make a note. Like, when it comes to theological, like, what is truth? Like, I very much so disagree with you. I don't think all of them are correct.
Okay.
However, we can either deliberately jump into that conversation, or we can continue.
Why? Then we can get into it more.
Sure. Why? Okay. Yeah. Cause, like, as in, like, I don't, like, cause it's a logical thing. I think a thing cannot be true and not true at the same time. So, and what they're all based on metaphysical statements, and they all have things about truth claims about the world. So it's not, now it's saying that they can't all be true is not the same thing as driving your belief, allowing your concept of belief to be driven by hubris and then masquerading as intellect. Yes. I think that's an important subject. But this is something that I have enjoyed about our conversations, and I think that we can do, if we can have a cordial conversation about differences in opinion when it comes to religion and truth.
So we're doing
I mean, like, we want that to happen all the time, but we just don't do it. And here's something that I'm okay with is that, like, I think when it comes down to the truth claims that different religious structures make, as in they're not just fashion statements that people hold on to in a spiritualish sense, but rather they're commitments to a thing being true. Yes. Maybe that thing is that the world was created by God in 6 days, or that you could, the history and the
point.
Yep. And so, like, in some ways, earnesty is more important than correctness.
Those explanations just don't matter to me. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Whether I believe them to be true or not. So,
okay.
The way a Jewish person describes exactly what you're saying, if we're using creation as a point, is no different from the way a Muslim explains it to me, to a Christian. It's different in what they're saying, but my own understanding of it is it doesn't matter to me. I think that they're all correct. There is, in this point, and I like make this statement, right? Because I just don't subscribe to any one religion at this point. I grew up more Episcopalian, naturally with my family, and I can look back now and not feel any negative tension or anything towards that, because I just feel like I get it now, right?
Okay.
In that fact, they're all correct, because I believe, and I think that most religious people also must believe, that this is not the limitation to our to consciousness and what exists, right? That we are just sort of experiencing this all within, a body, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the same, like in Christianity, they say that, like, we're all eternal. Like, I truly believe that. And I think that, like, when I take my last breath, that's not the end per se. Like, there's just more. And that's where, and then starting with that baseline and then expanding upon that is where all of the disagreement and all of the arguments start to happen, as we try to explain, well, what is more and what does that mean? To me, it's just impossible until you reach that moment to know, because, and then in which I believe that you become all of that. You literally become, infinite consciousness or your soul or God or whatever it is, the language is so limiting. It's so limiting to, and that's why it's so hard to have these discussions.
I would agree that they're difficult to have,
but we have
I'm enjoying it. Yeah,
emotion and feelings to what we are, and we try to explain that with, a select number of words that we have available to us.
Yeah, if you and I were to have a conversation, or were to enter into this conversation about truth claims and reality and religious claims, and we're not going to approach it with some sense of dignity for each other, it would not work.
Absolutely.
And generally speaking, my observation with conversations of this sort is either neither party or only one party is actually there earnestly. And so that's, and if neither party is, you might as well just start fighting, I guess,
Exactly.
or just stop talking. But the tricky one is when one party is there earnestly, because then the other one is manipulative.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's different ways and shapes and forms. So you make this idea. You're not you make this idea. You're talking about so the Christian, perhaps more reformed historicity of that would be a combination of, well, what is the person? I as a Christian determine the value in human beings because they're created in the image of God. That is the thing that is the value imbuing property, that they are created by God in His own image. So that it's inherent, it's baked into who you are. Now, I'm a Christian, that's where I come from, that understanding. And then John Calvin was talking during the Reformation about this idea called sensus divinitatis, which is sort of like we have a need for something greater. In his writing, it was directed towards we have a need for God, that we're drawn towards Him. But I would agree wholeheartedly that the outlook of the world, which is purely naturalistic, that we're just genetic, we're nothing but genes and chemicals, has an extremely hard hurdle to overcome when it comes to meaning and value. Yeah, I mean, you can, and I don't mean, but the point, yeah, and so how? Because we actually left the conversation. We started on the conversation of ego and a sense of acceptance.
Yeah,
and a criticism that can be leveled at organized religions is the way that they handle something called acceptance, which would be an interesting parallel, because within Christianity, you have to believe in Christ to be a Christian. It's hard to do. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You cannot. Another way of saying it is like you can't call yourself a Christian and deny Christ. It's sort of baked into the name.
Yeah, that's where my opinion about religion goes wrong per se. Which and that's if you study the history of it, which I'm not well versed on the history of all different world religions too much, but there's so much beauty and so many like amazing, beautiful stories, sort of encapsulated around religion. And then at the same time, it's just like everything else. There's a spectrum, and there's also just massive amounts of violence and destruction, and all of the state and church sort of subject.
Well, when you're dealing with something as heavy as the soul, it's going to have consequences. And I think that's something that we can take a step back on. The reason why I was bringing this up is because it harkens to that feeling of acceptance and that sense of having a place to belong, and acceptance is that I think sometimes we pursue religion to feel accepted in the similar way that you pursued the seals.
Absolutely.
To feel accepted. And
there's for sure people that prescribe to a lot of religious things in their church because they need to be accepted by their church mates or like by their congregation or whatever it is at some level. But
Well, I don't know. I have a challenge with that because it's not that they want to be accepted by the people. It's that they want to feel accepted. Those are different things.
Gotcha.
Like you cannot be, I'm going to make an assessment, but you cannot be a seal and not know how to swim, right?
True.
I would believe so because and given, we can make a joke there. But you cannot be a seal and not know how to swim at all. And so if you were to, and when you are in the SEALs, just like when I'm in the Rangers, there is a very defensive posture against anybody who claims to be one of you who isn't you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so you have that esprit de corps. And then yet in religious beliefs and commitments to reality, there's a combination of that esprit de corps, but there isn't really, at least within Christianity, there isn't really the gatekeeping of the, that's not gatekeeping, it's not the right word. There isn't, if you read the Bible, you recognize that it's not other people who make you a Christian. It's your commitment to Christ.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, but yet people will, but even since the beginning of even Christianity or whatever, people gather together to worship together and worship and spend time in community and solve each other's problems and whatever. And so I'm kind of looking at this from the perspective of how you're talking about this need for acceptance and this need for being, and people pursuing religion and people pursuing the SEALs for that same thing. I think that's also why cults can be so attractive. Because cults solve the problem of the need for acceptance within the individual, except for instead of solving the problem, they're actually just manipulating it. They're hijacking that need for acceptance and meaning.
Exactly.
So
yeah, I agree with that. But that word gatekeeping is another. It's a term that I feel like the opposite of that would be essentially like letting go, or like more of like acceptance or something. So there has to be a balance of both, because if you fully go like, okay, we have this religion we prescribe to, and these are all of our beliefs and our values within that religion, and then there's this other religion with its own beliefs and values, and we're competing about who's right all the time, right? Like the truth. What was the term you use about truth?
Truth statements.
Like truth statements, like God is this and God is that, and everything is in my mind now is like we're all talking about the same fucking thing, and it's just trying to use languages, right? And we're separated by cultures and language to try to prove to each other who's more accurate in their explaining of it. And so then a religion formed, and then you sort of have like the gatekeepers of it, whether that's like your church or the state or whatever it is, and it's changed over time. But the gatekeeping of it to me is the opposite of, like, in my marriage, the more we've learned in the last few years to be okay with each other, the better off we feel, right? And it's not to say that we don't have boundaries. So in my opinion, as it applies to religion, is like boundaries is a better word than gatekeeping, because it's not like full blown gatekeeping, but you have the ability to also hear somebody else's belief, right? And be okay with it. And then in order for it to work, it has to go both ways. It's almost like there has to be a point where we just go over time. All of these religions, we're okay with each other. You know what I mean? We're not, the conflict comes when we're constantly trying to prove who's right, the truth statements.
The SEALs wouldn't be the SEALs if anyone could be a SEAL. If the door was wide open, SEALs wouldn't be the SEALs. If the door was, if anyone who claimed it could be it.
This opinion even applies to something you just said that works, which is when there's like what do we call it when there's an imposter, stolen valor, right?
Mm-hmm.
I watch these videos, or like you see it sometimes where you see some person that's like stealing valor, whether it's a Ranger or a Delta Force guy or a Green Beret or a SEAL, like any soft or even non-soft person that, you've seen people that pretend to be admirals or whatever it is. And it's like, it's only for their own ego, right? To sort of walk around and feel this like sort of attention towards their ego of I've got these these accomplishments, and it's just a respected thing or whatever it is for them, right? Their true self without the ego doesn't need that, right? But what I just said about religion sort of applies to that, because I have an opinion about this. And I used to just fall into the opinions of whatever everyone else's was around me, which is like, fuck those guys. They are like, like scumbags. They should be fucking persecuted for, walking around with a trident or whatever it is. And, God forbid, there's this one video I saw where these younger teen guys are like literally follow this dude around the airport who's, yes, he's stealing valor. He's got like a backpack on with tridents and stuff. And they find him, and then they just like essentially berate him through the airport all the way until they finally get him to just go like, okay, here. And he rips off his shit. And it actually is like really sad. I'm like, I get that. But if you just, the same thing I said with religious beliefs and truth statements is like, if you can incorporate some level of letting go too, right? And it's the same thing with releasing traumas from yourself. And
letting go of, because letting go can be a little bit broad. Letting go of what?
Yes.
Are you
like
this is?
Let's say in that moment, those guys did that and they recorded a quick video and then they turned it off after a few seconds and were like, "Listen, man, it's not okay to do that. I would recommend you not do that anymore." And then go on about their day, right? And now that there might be some different opinions because they're like, well, if we don't do this to the level that we did it, he might not stop doing it and he might continue doing it, right? And like, well, what's the detriment of that? You know what I mean? Just making other people angry, or like maybe he fooled some people and they give him the sort of accolades that he was fishing for by doing that. I don't know, but
well, I think the issue is that he's lying. Like it's a
thing. It is.
Yeah, it's an affrontation to truth. The truth is that a seal is a certain thing. It's somebody who's accomplished a certain thing. It's been a certain thing. It's solid in reality, and the issue is that he's the affront, like the challenge being is that the issue is that he's lying about it. It's not this. It's not as simple as stolen valor. It's that this is a thing that's true. You're committed to it being true. That being a seal means something. It has a certain weight to it. It has a certain quality to it. There is a loyalty to the tribe. Perhaps there's something to it that is real. And that person, by imposturing it, is saying that it's not real. He's saying that your achievements are fake. Now,
yeah, go ahead.
So I would agree that I think I'm not agree. Like, I understand the point of saying that maybe the issue of the ego of the people following him around and recording him and ripping the stuff off and humiliating him is driven actually by the egos of the individuals pursuing him.
Both, yeah.
Which is damaging. It is damaging, but there is. I do think the affrontation is real. Like, if you're going to tell me that it, how do I say it? Because we're committed to reality. Like, we things need to be real, and so when somebody is trying to affront that reality,
yes,
it falls apart.
It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where I come back to the point of like gatekeeping, and then the opposite of gatekeeping, which is like more of like a level of understanding, and then trying to find some balance in between, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that like that she should just be like, man, that's that's a compliment to the SEALs. This guy's probably like a loser, and he's doing this, and that's what he chose to make himself feel good, right, or whatever.
Well, we make a pretty hard distinction between people who go down the stolen valor route because of some sort of mental deficiency, and
too. You don't know.
And like where he's got all the medals from all the wars that have ever existed, kind of thing. It's like, oh man, I'm sorry. And sometimes that's the case, and sometimes, but when it is somebody who's like just claiming to be something for clout, we naturally respond to that negatively, and that's, I wouldn't consider that gatekeeping at all.
I wouldn't disagree with that. But I thought it was just a good point to apply to also like religions, where like we're gatekeeping it to me, if I think of things on a spectrum, is like it's now disallowing you to even start attempting to understand each other's sides, and that's been the history of it, since the beginning of religions. It's like, if you think about it.
What about? Do you think that's out? Do you think that's this? I'm gonna present something as a challenge. Do you think that's just an abstraction of personal responsibility? So, like, if I am unwilling to listen to you about what you believe, that's me as a person saying I don't want to listen to you. And it's easy for me to ad hoc or post hoc even produce validations for that. Yeah. Oh, he's a dishonest interlocutor. What he believes is not serious. It's all an ego thing. He's lying about this or whatever, right? Yeah. But rather, like, you and I just having a disagreement or having a conversation about something as serious as religion, we can offload the responsibility of our own personal choices onto whatever it is as a whole. Yeah. We are capable of doing it, but we shouldn't.
Yeah. And also, then, it's so serious.
Yeah. Well, no, it's serious because it's serious matter. We're talking about your soul here. We're talking about my. It is a serious matter, but that doesn't.
I can agree.
But it's better to stumble through it and try to figure it out than to just rigid stone yourself to some sort of.
Absolutely.
Rigid. It is better to stumble through something like that than it is to. Haphazardly glue yourself to some piece of sand, hoping that it's just hoping that your ego will be able to hold out the pain of the existential crisis. I'm getting way too far out on this one, but
no, it's all good. We could go on a whole nother podcast just about this alone, but
I'm sure we could.
But anyways. Where were we at? Anyways, when we started getting to that.
Well, no, this is a good because we're talking about the need for acceptance and this idea of like this idea of a need for a sense of acceptance and having a place and having a community and having a culture and having somebody to commit to. So we've addressed a lot of it as in being what led to you going into the SEALs and what we've talked about during time in service and then after time in service. The one reason why I do appreciate this conversation is that I really don't think it's exclusive to military people. I think there is something baked into the American cake that has been baked into the American cake. I don't know whether it's in the last 5 years, 50 years, or 15 years. It doesn't matter to me. The issue is that our generation is starved for some sense of direction and purpose and motive.
Absolutely. That's really... Those concepts are what's missing for sure. If you like whatever arguments or whatever topics or things you get into on a daily basis is like, that's the general for me overall is just a continued lack of like everybody's just generalizing everything. You know what I mean? And then it's hard to make arguments about anything when you realize that like the labeling, and like just attaching to opinions is the same, and generally it's just why do we feel so bad overall? You know what I mean? Why does it just feel like sort of a negative feeling going on, across a massive group of people?
I don't know why I've never heard of it that way. I don't know why I've never heard it that way. And you said it rather cleanly. Why is it that everything there doesn't matter where you are, it's bad? Like it just you know what I mean? It doesn't matter where you're at in America. It just feels bad. Like
when we talk about it, but then when you go about your everyday life, do you see these things happening in front of you all the time? And people will argue like, well, you don't live where I live. Gotcha. Well, what problems do you see on a daily basis where you are? I get that. But it's, to my opinion, is just that, technology is the main driver for that. It's like we're uber aware of everything outside of our immediate environment. To the point that it's distracting our mind and our subconscious mind towards it. And obviously on an individual level, we already know through psychology that the mind fixates on negative emotions and remembers that, however much more than you remember positive things. That's why my kids are like, hey, how do you feel about your brother? He's annoying. Like, okay.
Yeah.
The day, because 90% of the day you guys were playing, you guys were doing stuff, you were laughing, and then like you annoyed each other for 10% of the day, and then your mind just thinks that you have an annoying brother at this point, right? So
there can be an attempt at a biological answer for this one, is that like our attention span, our attention focus has been developed to, I'm going to use somebody else's argument, it's not my own, but our attention span has evolved to focus on threats. We have a threat-focused consciousness, and so therefore we remember negative things more than positive things, because one negative thing will have different consequences than 10 positive things. Sure, it doesn't matter how many times you successfully make the drive to the grocery store; it's the one accident that counts. And so then we have a phone. And we have our computers, which is constantly relaying information. And there's a reason why bad news floats to the top, is because it's more engageable.
That's what we're doing, man. Yeah.
And as a result, I have a bad news machine staring at me all day long, trying to just hinting at bad news to sell. I can make that argument, but if we make the argument that if we begin with the assumption that we are more than just this world.
Yes. That's the point. So as we go along, we're like evolving to the fact that we have all this, like literally our brains are changing. Like if we could look at ourselves another 5,000 years, we're going to look different for sure. But, I've got friends, I've got a friend whose opinion is always like, the world's just completely overpopulated, like true, right? But you're also among that population. So it's the same concept of being like, you show up to a restaurant you want to go to and there's a huge line. You're like, look at this line and all these people in this line, and like now you're going to step in the line and you're part of the problem that you're complaining about. But my point to that being is like, that's true, and we'll work through it. But at the same time, maybe there's a reason for everything. Maybe the universe expands as consciousness increases, and so the more people we have, the more opportunity we have to. Maybe we're supposed to use up all the resources here and move on to another place or whatever, or die off. I don't know, but we are supposed to be here enjoying ourselves and being in the moment that is now. And it's just a constant barrage of the past and future, like at all times. Right. And it's just, generally people don't feel good,
I want to hone in on that one of why is it that it doesn't matter what religion you ascribe to, it doesn't matter where you're located in the world, in at least in the West, it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is. It seems like for many, if not most people, the general opinion is whatever it is, it is bad. Yeah. And that I mean it may come and go. It may be with the season and maybe with time, but it's a commonality amongst people. It's easier to complain than it is to be grateful.
Yeah, but I also feel like the truth is that we see all of that negativity and that generally like shitty feeling, like the suck per se. But we also know that massive shifts in consciousness away from that don't happen unless enough people feel a deep sense of suffering and struggle, over time, over history. That's how it's happened.
Yeah, I mean, humankind does adapt. We do have things to be thankful for, and that we have plenty to be grateful for, in the sense that the idea that our struggle is mostly an existential struggle is pretty luxurious.
So sort of leading into this, what we just said, like exactly what you just said, and then integrating that or applying it to veterans that transition out of the Navy, like that's it. That's exactly the thing, right? That's the sort of the master key per se. It's not where you live. It's not the money you make. It's not the job you have. That's going to fix anything. It's just exactly that's the last sentence that you just said.
It's the heart of I think, okay, so let me rephrase it that way. I think sometimes we harken back to a simpler time where life was about survival or our agrarian society or whatever, because we tell ourselves that when they had to worry about growing crops to make sure they had grain to survive the winter, to do that, they didn't have the same existential crisis of like, what's the purpose of it all?
Yep.
And I don't know if I believe that. Sometimes I wonder if that's a bit of a historic or a chronological snobbery.
Yeah, because as long as there's
because
ever been societies or communities, we've also had the need for validation and acceptance from each other. That's what
I would agree with that one. Yeah, I don't think there was any. I don't think there ever was a golden age where everybody just knew who they were and figured things out and like, I'm the candlestick maker and I'm the baker and I'm the.
Yeah,
I don't think there ever was that idea like perfect time.
No.
I think that's a little bit of looking at history through rose-colored glasses.
Yeah, having the concept of like utopia in our minds as if it's anything other than right now, like breathing air and whatever your perspective or your perception of reality is.
Well, sometimes that's the good being the enemy of the great. That's a pretty easy one of like we're refusing anything good that we see in our world because it isn't the utopia. I can get behind that one. We're refusing I'm not okay with the Aero Precision AR-15 that I have right now because it's not a BCM, or I'm not okay with the BCM I have right now because it's not a Knight's armament. And that's a gun culture reference, but I mean sometimes it is the I can't do a Halo night raid tonight out of my house, so I might as well not go out and figure out and go on a hike and learn something. I think I mean,
or the ice cream around here where I live sucks, so I'm starting a company and we're gonna make awesome ice cream.
We're gonna make a hard segue. We're gonna do this because I think we're getting somewhere, but I think we'll actually come back to it. But we're gonna make I would like to try a hard segue here on this one. You and I, there's an interesting subject, and I want to kind of hear your opinion on what you think about this one. And this might be a bit of a sensitive topic, but you brought up a message earlier about how you have children, and kids, and I remember this in my younger years, where you start sort of coming into this age of consciousness, which is that like preteen years where you're starting to care about what other people think, and you're starting to care about how you're perceived. And I don't think it's by accident or by design necessarily. I don't know if it's necessarily, but I guess it's not the issue. But that also correlates with the age that children are introduced to pornography in our day and age.
That's a huge topic for me. Yeah, that's a huge. I have a big opinion on that one. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I want to hear your opinion on it because you and I have talked about it about a year ago. But I think, me coming from a Christian perspective, I think most people can assume what my opinion on porn is. But also, I don't think it's a coincidence that those two things happen at the same time. I know people can say that predators are trying to prey younger and younger. You could make that argument. You could say that you could make that argument. I guess you could, but I don't think you can lay the question of pornography at the feet of specifically a small group of pedophiles, I guess. What I think you can say is that why is it that those two things happen at the same time? Or what's your argument?
My opinion is that you can lay it there, and that is sometimes when there's such a problem with something, and you can encompass the problem into really, my opinion is you can encompass it into all of it to include, and this will be a touchy subject, to include all of the sort of new age issue of like transgender, like gender dysphoria and like all this stuff going on. And my opinion is that the advent of, and I've studied and read a lot into this. I'm not just like shitting it out of my mouth, but the advent of free porn online in like whatever year that happened, because it used to be there was a little bit more of an innocence to it. It was like, oh, you found like some Playboy magazines or something as a kid, you know what I mean? And like whether seeing that at too young of an age caused some trauma for you later, you know, like in any kind of form of sex addiction or anything like that. And like generally, it's like we don't even really need to use. We can use the word sex addiction, but there's, in my opinion, it's like there's just so many people. There's so many billions and billions of dollars made in that industry that even though it's kind of a silent thing that you were like, there's no metric for it per se, there is, because why is that industry such a huge multi-billion dollar industry? Is because people are looking at it, right?
Yeah.
It's like so much every day.
Mm-hmm.
So that is just one of the, if I could go talk about the solution for a problem and go like, hey, if there's this huge, complicated, complex problem, but you could identify like one thing that, like as individuals, if you had an addiction or you had like, if you were a heroin addict, like the solution to your heroin addiction, or let's just say like homelessness, isn't that you don't have a home, right? Or that you, don't have food, shelter, and water, but the root cause of it is whatever trauma caused you to start becoming an addict, an alcoholic, whatever it is in your life, to the point that you committed all of your energy towards that substance or that thing, to the point that you are homeless now, right? To me, that porn is one of those things. It's like, it so affects your subconscious mind when you look at it in ways that you don't realize immediately, right? For like instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
To the point that like over time that develops, and now we have this problem in our society of like deviant sexuality, right? Sexuality is good and individual sexuality is good. It's part of you, but now we have like identities associated with it and like the labels of it, and like when we talk about the whole like alphabet soup community. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I have friends and family in that community, but my point is that like people are generally, it seems like they're starting to think, or like we believe, even as it relates to not sexuality things in porn, that the more labels you put upon yourself, the more you understand your identity. And I think it's the opposite. Like you need to label yourself less and just understand who you are, like as a feeling, right? As opposed to a definition and a label. Like I am a veteran with PTSD and ADHD or whatever, like whatever stack of labels you have, and then that becomes your identity, where you think.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's take a break there. Let's kind of zero in on.
Yeah, the same thing with the gender dysphoria type stuff, where it's like, I have these pronouns that I identify with, and
well, you are Chris before you are Chris, this series of descriptors.
Yes,
you are Chris before you are Chris the SEAL. You are Chris before you are Chris the veteran.
Absolutely,
you are Chris before you are Chris the small business owner.
The more you can peel the onion and understand the core of that onion and who you actually are, the better you will feel, in my opinion.
Because that goes back to the argument of acceptance, though, is that, well, because it's too difficult for Chris to accept Chris the human being, or Chris who you are, you wanted to augment that with Chris the SEAL.
Yes.
And some of it was Chris the SEAL wanted to figure out if Chris the human being was worth being Chris the SEAL.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think within I do want to make sure that we break between 2 points, though, because I think the transgenderism argument is a challenge when it comes to identities and building an identity on a series of labels. Yeah, because I think it's a really interesting tie that you can say that some people become a thing. I became a ranger for to try to solve the same problem that a person will identify with the LGBTQ community. Yeah, I think there's a connection that can be made there. I don't know if I'm equipped to handle it today. Yeah, I don't know if I am, but I do think that I do think that that's separate than the issue with pornography. Though they're connected, I want to make sure that they're separated in how we're talking about it. Venn diagram it one way or another, in that how pornography can be a result of and a cause for exacerbating that need for an acceptance.
Yes, but at a baseline level, to answer your question, like free, I don't even have to say like pornography is bad. Free pornography, infinitely available in every fucking deviant direction that it can go, is bad and is causing a huge problem in our subconscious minds as a collective society.
Well, if anything, it's taking what should be sacred and it's making it profane.
Absolutely.
If anything, the very simple thing is that, like,
and it's
go ahead. Sorry, it's like, if anything, it's that pornography is the commodification of of something that's supposed to be intimate and extremely meaningful. Yes. And I know that the 70s, 80s, 90s, and this free love idea, and I get it. Like, I'm just gonna call it out. Yeah, is that like you're identifying your being with some sort of activity as opposed to that activity being it's not self-expression. Let me rephrase it that way.
Even go even further into that and actually identify with some level of their sexuality, which is only one small part of everything that you are, right?
It's reducing oneself to less than a summary of your parts.
Yeah, and so like generally it just needs like one solution to a huge problem in the sexuality aspect of the mental health problem going on is to regulate pornography. But just like any other huge industry that makes a lot of money, it's probably not going to, because it's reached a point of not being regulated to where you just can't. It's hard to go back, right?
I don't know if you could actually regulate porn. I think you could try. I think there are certain things that could be done, but I do agree with you in the sense that I think it's difficult when it comes to the relationship with the government and even actually when it comes to religion, in the sense of this is exactly why forced conversion does not work. Yeah, it's exactly so. The idea that the government will legislate morality is the same problem that the idea that forced conversion would not work. Is that if I want to, although there's a value in saying that the culture comes together, and because a government for the people, by the people, would come together and say, we ban this practice within our reach because we all agree that it's against the rules or something like that. Let's just use the example of murder is a pretty easy one. We're gonna collectively agree that murder on all levels of the political spectrum is illegal. It doesn't matter whether you're the king or the pauper. You can't murder. Okay, law is greater than man. And then, but what we can't do, that's different than, and we could, or I'm sorry, I made that really confusing. So we agree, we can agree that, and we can use law to codify certain concepts, like it's against the law to murder, it's illegal to murder, it's illegal to do this. We can also recognize that me making it illegal and me not doing it because I don't want the consequences is very different than me not doing something because I say it's wrong.
Yeah. And
so when it comes to pornography, the issue is that forced conversion will not work, although it's not to say regulation isn't outside the window. We agree that children shouldn't have access to it. Or in the same way, I think generally speaking, Americans are against the idea of pornography being played openly in our education centers.
Yeah, but there's, it's just, that is a whole level of, as the society evolves, what we agree on at any given time, which that is culture, right?
Yeah, it is.
That just needs to, it's almost like there's so many things that we do, and it's always going to be this way, where we find some technology or some invention, something we can do. The internet was one, social media was one, free pornography on the internet was one. Like if tomorrow somebody's like, we can clone you from, you can basically choose an age. If they said, hey, Forrest, we now have the technology that like you can, as a service, you can clone yourself to be, and the clone will basically exist at any age that you choose, right? And then
okay, so I can transfer my consciousness and
then
choose
later
my body.
Yes, and then when you're tired of how, when you get like 85 and you're like, man, I want to shift my consciousness over to that clone, then they basically do that. But my point being, like, that's science fiction, but the point is that we're constantly in this state of having the ability to do something through technology, and then not taking the tactical pause to talk about if we should, right? And that's what always happens,
That is a common theme in both science fiction and in humanity, is that we ask ourselves what we could do instead of asking whether we should.
And it's always going to go with what we could do, and we're going to execute that, and then society becomes basically an evolution around those decisions. Just kind of what I think. That, like, when has there been a time where we decided not to do something? That's hard to tell.
Well, because it's not going to get documented. It's the black swan problem from Taleb, is that if we'll take 9/11 as a good example. If any one of the people working at the airport that day had said, "Oh, it's kind of odd that all these guys have box cutters and they got pulled into a room," we would have never had 9/11, and then or whatever it is that caused it. Right? You know what I mean? Like, it's not that there. In retrospect, we definitely see that there were some issues, but like, it's not that there were. Yeah. But there's so many ways where all of 9/11 could have been stopped and never have happened that were just missed opportunities. Maybe. I mean, there's plenty of ways you can see that. Retrospect is always 2020, but the event that became 9/11 happened because at so many times. I mean. Shit. I mean, the people who decided to hijack the planes could have had a crisis of conscience. Mm-hmm. They could have recognized that they're going to get hundreds of thousands of people who they would call their people killed as a result, and say, you know what? It's better that we learn to live. It is better that we survive in tandem with people who we disagree with than it is to produce more. Or to inspire more generations of killing, I guess.
Exactly. It all comes back to the same simple concepts, no matter how complicated the discussion is, or whether you're talking about pornography or religion or whatever. All comes down to the same basic principles that balance. It is always good to find that.
Well, and to go back into it, I think pornography is a perfect example of something where it literally comes down to you. People do porn in secret. They look at it. Literally comes down to you. You can't force somebody out of it. You can't force you can't regulate it with government. You can't force people out of it. It's literally one of those things you do. Where do you look at porn? In the dark, in the corner, when no one's looking, with the lights off, at night, when you're alone, when you're, it's
no matter how much it expands to be okay, whether it's in society and there's obviously this feeling of some people trying to make minor attracted persons more okay, against the other spectrum of people that's like, we're not going to agree that that's ever okay in our society. And the same thing with explicit material in the libraries of schools and stuff like this, and sort of like drag shows in front of children, like what you just said, as far as where you choose to do that, is no matter how much it expands to be for people that want it to be okay, it still makes you feel not good inside, right? You still have this sort of shame and guilt associated with that, and shame and guilt are one of the pillars of bad mental health, right? So I just in my mind, I can connect all those things and sort of understand it at a more basic, simpler level.
Okay, so you made a claim there, and I think it's a good one, but because I wanted to ask the question and see if you can elaborate a little bit on it. There's this idea that the guilt we have associated with things like pornography is purely a social construct. It is an artificial thing created by people. and that if we could get away from, if we could change that artificial creation, we wouldn't feel bad. So in other words, if we could apply it to something else, like let's say stealing, if we could, or even in like you see it in some fictional universes like murder, like it's not murder if you don't get caught, kind of thing. And let's bring up the example of like John Wick, right? It's a movie, but like in the world of the movie, everyone who is part of the guild or whatever it is has sort of agreed to some sort of social contract between each other that murdering each other is okay at any given moment, except for on continental grounds.
Yeah,
so that's
exclude other groups of people to not be involved the way that like cartels do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So like if you're inside the assassin's world, right, you can kill each other as much as you want, but there are rules, and the rules are you can't do it on continental grounds. You can't do it on certain areas. You have to follow certain rules, which is interesting because that's arguing that murder is a social construct that people can sort of disregard.
Yeah.
And when we look at things like pornography, we see a little bit of this movement to try to normalize it. And if we were to sort of,
sexuality is so normal, it's part of everybody. Like everybody has some level of sexuality as
well,
part of
I think it's trying to take the sacred and make it profane. I think it's trying to take what is something that it is imbued with meaning and life generating. Sex is the thing that produces life, right? Exactly. It's a life. But also it's beautiful. It's life, but it's like it's the thing that produces life. Let's make it so mundane that it's just the everyday thing, and I think that's what comes out of it that turns it into such a, which is I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. That's the thing which makes it so ugly, is that you're taking something that even if it's not about life generation, is an intensely personal commitment, and making it a casual transaction with nothing of value except for the moment of feeling, and then the mystery of getting there. It's always it's gross, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
And also it mistakes and replaces the value of a thing for the anticipation of a thing. I mean, it's the value of a thing versus the anticipation of a thing is kind of a way it goes. Like the anticipation of pain is worse than the feeling of pain, and it's reducing the value of a relationship to the anticipation of one. Oh, wouldn't it be great if I was in a scenario where this happened? And it's like, well,
yeah, definitely.
You're replacing the reality of the subject for a cheap simulacra at best.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I typed in because I saw this guy. He's a former porn star that like is now a motivational speaker and mental health advocate. And I just typed it in, former porn star turned motivational speaker, and there's just like endless articles of like former porn stars that have like sort of tried to change their lives around, minus the first one who became a motivational speaker who talks about turning his life around, that just recently had a relapse.
Well, I do think there's a very dark side to having a sense of purpose and meaning. I've got it. I don't know if you can see it on the shelf, but I've got these 3 books called Sanction, written by a guy who went by the name of Roman McClay. Yeah. And when I was I've only read the first one, and the book, I've only finished the first book. Sorry. You can read it and you can definitely see it as a man sort of at his wit's end, trying to argue for a sense of purpose and meaning. And he's just hungry for life. And I think in some sense, the book is very much so him arguing and trying to him writing the book is him trying to figure something out. And he's arguing with his demons, and he's trying to figure out he's at his wit's end in his life's existence. And it's like and I think what ended up happening is he got a modicum of something from it, but it wasn't what ended up happening is he actually went to try to live out the fantasy that was his novels, and he ended up murdering 6 people and getting killed in a shootout. And it's interesting because I think that I still find the book interesting. I don't think you can buy him anymore. I mean, so that's cool, fine, whatever. Yeah. But I think the part about it that is dangerous in our world is that the search for meaning is a very dangerous search. And there's a reason why our society wants men to be weak and feckless and soft, and why any sort of man of substance is referred to as dangerous, or the whole white supremacy, patriarchy, fascism thing is like,
I feel all those things, but also I know that what I see and feel based off of those things coming across my feeds and everything to build sort of a picture in my mind about what's going on is like, but in my daily life, most people aren't those things, most people. So it just, I don't know. It's hard to keep your beliefs in order, but I like that general feeling is based off of not a majority of people's beliefs about those things, The majority of people I still believe are good. I still believe that because I'm basing it off of the reality that's around me and like where I travel, where I go. And I don't just mean here in town, like where I go. I've been all around the world just like you have. And in some of the shittiest places in the world, I didn't, some of these things that are going on that we are perceiving right now aren't true, like around me, I guess, per se,
I kind of do, but I actually kind of don't. Like I understand that it doesn't matter where you go in the world, you can find good and you can find beauty and you can find goodness. Like you can
good people per se.
Good people, yeah. You can go into we've traveled around the world to some of actually very war-torn countries. Like I remember developing relationships with people in Afghanistan, and like that's an example of one where it's not that I assumed that they were going to be less than people and like was surprised by it. I don't think I ever assumed that you could go into a different country and find people who believed good things.
And that's a different term also, because good, like we all have dark and light. We all have, like the spectrum of things. And then really what defines you as good, in my opinion, is just where you keep yourself in that spectrum of dark and light, right? Because if you commit too far into the dark, you start to become like not good. And that's based off of what you've experienced. We were all just innocent children at one point, and everything came from the absorption of what happened to us and what we've done to other people for, over time. So, but back to your, I like these long-winded answers and talks, but I'm going to say a statement, but like porn is just bad.
I think that will come to
come from it. If we didn't never have it, which is, like we said, subjective to say, if we didn't never, at least the free version of it, where it's like, less people will use it if they had to freaking pay for it. Right. But it was a little more regulated. If we didn't have just access to infinite levels of deviant porn, on the internet, there would just be less sex crimes. There would be less infidelity. People's minds would generally fantasize left in a deviant way. There would be less pedophilia. There'd be less gender dysphoria. All the sexual related things that that don't feel right would be less. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think we can work on that one. Yeah. So you're making the I want to make sure we understand the claim and the argument as best as possible. And your statement is that the free access to pornography is itself a bad thing. It is a bad thing because of the consequences that it has on a society, whether it encourages because it encourages deviant behavior. That deviant behavior being written in as sort of objectively bad. And so You can say that it is a net negative based on objective ideas.
Now that's porn alone.
Yeah.
Sexuality, I have a totally different opinion about that. Like there are communities of people in different countries and places that explore their sexuality in healthy, meaningful, and even spiritual ways that is amazing. And so it's not to say sexuality is bad.
You're not saying it in the caricature of the Puritan aspect where like sex is supposed to be nothing but pure utility, which I still think is a caricature. I don't think that has a historical reflection that's very clean. Yeah. But I mean, we can believe crazy things and not think they're crazy in our day. So maybe there are things that I'm sure there's been some times, and I know you can look through history and you can find books and writings where people have categorized the act of sex as being a negative thing, but that's
yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't categorize that as the whole.
No, but we're specifically talking about porn. I think was the question is like, yeah, it's a problem.
I can say with I can say that it's a net negative for sure, and I will also make the argument that I will make an ethical argument against it. I think it is bad. I think it itself is bad as well as its effects. I think it's a net negative on society. I think that it's
net negative or net positive, like because nothing can ever be utopia perfect the way a lot of people think in their minds that it needs to be.
There can't be utopia perfect, but I can say I can say that this is the opposite. Like pornography is a dystopia. It is a bad. It is an evil in itself. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that it produces that is good. All things that are good are in spite of it or in redemption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People, the good is that it's not. You don't see it as a good thing. There's no. It doesn't. It's not a therapy. It's not a production. It's always a post hoc justification.
It's in that. Go ahead.
It's in the category of what?
To me, it's in the category of things that you could sort of categorize in that same sort of net negative arena, like heroin. We can generally say heroin is a net negative.
Okay, so there's okay. So you can say net heroin. Some people say alcohol is a net negative. I think there could be an argument for that, but
then my opinion starts to change because there's some people that sip wines and tequila and can enjoy it, and there's can go in a whole different discussion about that, but you can't really sip heroin and go like, oh, I'm just gonna have a little nightcap,
Yeah, or like methamphetamine is a really good example, right? Like, but then some of these drugs are used in medicines, and that's questionable. Opiates is another example, and we get very quickly into probably the meta question being, what is the good? Because we can say that the argument of pornography is bad, but it's not in the same way that we could say you had your argument of the need for acceptance is bad, but the idea is that there's also a thing that is good. And so like it's harder. It can be hard. It can sometimes be easier to outline what is bad than it is to define what is good.
Always, yeah.
It's easier to have. It's oftentimes easier to point out a problem than it is to create a solution. Well, one of them is because it's identification versus creation. Yeah, it's easier to describe than it is to generate sometimes.
So yeah, generally that was my my sort of like you said, like entrance into the teams, and then as far as the other point of the podcast being what I'm doing now, it's just what I've sort of evolved into through the process of figuring those things out in the last 6 years of being out of the Navy. So I don't know how much use it is to compare to other people, but for me, it was for sure a journey, like a process of figuring those things out in order to feel sort of, successfully transitioned from the military to civilian life. And so Now I
I
feel
think,
great, you know?
yeah, I think that at the same time that this is going to be an advantage and a disadvantage. I think one of the advantages that veterans bring to the rest of the world right now is that they're transitioning. The transition from the military life to civilian life is undergoing a similar sort of existential crisis, or like questions of what for and what am I aiming at, that other people will face, but veterans have the opportunity to face it a little bit later with a little bit more maturity, or maybe with a different set of experiences, and so they have something to bring to the table, which is no surprise why so many veterans have presented different sort of, I wouldn't say life coaching solutions, but there are issues in that vein. And
Good thing
what
to be there. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and so like as we close, your your story is one story amongst many stories, and I really appreciate that we've talked about this need for acceptance. And if you were to say, for people who are looking into the abyss of trying to answer the question, what for, who, whether or not they're coming out of the military or we're in this world and we're like, God dang, I don't know what to look at. I don't know what to aim at. And what would you say? What would you say to them? What would you say to your younger self who is struggling blindly in the darkness, trying to figure out where you were going?
I think that's a good way to put it, because what all of this has allowed me to do, in my opinion, is become a better father, because I have identified those things, and I now can sort of, like, my kids are at the perfect age to where they're, like I said, their little egos are starting to develop. And so I feel like I can just be a healthier father towards them, just understanding those concepts now. I would have maybe told my younger self, it's easy to say some of these things, like, don't care so much what people think, but unless you get them to understand what that actually means, they're like, it's the same thing as saying, like, keep your eye on the ball when they're learning baseball. It doesn't, unless you tell them that means follow the ball with your eye as long as you possibly can, like keep focus of it until you swing and it makes contact with your bat, which will, improve your hitting ability. You just hear parents at the games going like, oh, he misses a swing, and they go, keep your eye on the ball. So it's the same sort of concept when I tell my 9-year-old, like, hey, don't care so much what people think. And then I go, now I just have the ability to sort of sit down with him and actually put the time and effort into a short explanation on, the reason why is because all the people that you're like your best friends and your family and all the people that actually truly love and care about you, they don't mind so much, what you look like and some of these, so it's okay to care about what you look like, for example, but just balance that so that it doesn't like stress you out. So a culmination of all of these concepts and sort of teaching into them is I think, I honestly, I meditate with my kids. It's pretty fun. They like it. So okay. They can both go for a good 5 minutes or so.
A solid 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, I started with 5 minutes now.
Hey, that's good. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for this conversation, especially in regards to not necessarily just to be the cheesy, more vulnerabilities of life, but for allowing us to kind of peel behind the window or peel behind the veil and see how maybe we argue that our motivations are one thing when really they're another.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. I do. So thank you very much for kind of having a hard but good talk.
Yeah.
We talked about things like religion without murdering each other, and we talked about things like Rangers and Steels without going down the road of, yawn. I've heard this 100 times, and so I appreciate it. Thanks, Chris. And
appreciate you, man. That was awesome.
And so although there was one thing that we never really got into, which is what we can look at in the future. I really did I really did appreciate this conversation. So
yeah,
if people want to follow you, your ice cream business, or your are interested in your training organizations, how do they find you?
Yep. So the easiest way is go on the gram at Fox2 Sierra, FOX2, the number 2, SIERRA is our training business. And I'm partners with 2 awesome guys up in New York, 2 lawyers. And we all 3 sort of came together on, Uvalde happened, all these sort of active shooter things keep happening. They happened here in my local community, a couple years ago, and just going like, what's the solution to this outside of the sort of discussion of, guns and, arming schools and teachers and these kind of different knee-jerk sort of reactions is like, just as we adapt to the problem, my only other skill in life, like I said, is tactics. And so I naturally start stirring about ideas. And one of my partners in that business came up with this great idea. And it's a ballistic form factor of a whiteboard, which would naturally exist in a classroom, so that as the SOPs for schools don't change and they continue to tell teachers that when a shooting happens to lock the doors and hide the kids inside and wait, that they at least can barricade themselves in with a ballistic wall. They can move behind it. And they actually can use it in the classroom. So we're focused on form factors and not just bulletproof stuff.
For those of us who are in the military, we understand the word form factor, but not everybody does. So what you're saying is you've got in colloquial terms, a bulletproof whiteboard that the teacher can affix to the door to provide it to make a barricade. Like a legitimate art.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very easily. And or maneuver kids in a single file line around it, or connect them to block a hallway, different sorts of stuff. But that was one of our original product ideas that we're working on now, and it's starting to pick up because it makes a lot of sense. But
if people want to get in, if someone listening to the show has influence over their school or they're involved in an education, if somebody who's listening has access to investment or what do you like, that's through Fox2 Sierra. That's where they're going to find you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That's I want to make sure that the one thing that we get to provide is a channel for someone's like, I'm looking for a way where I can contribute. Here's a way to contribute.
Yeah, appreciate it. And the website is exactly the same as the Instagram page Rites.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the other one is Beef Free Craft Ice Cream. I am the founder of that, and that's also in a process of basically scaling into a storefront, but gonna for sure be growing that into at least a local distribution of pints, because that's what's been working for me. That's how I sort of kicked it off. How do I sell ice cream? I don't know. I'm just going to, I spent the last 5 years experimenting. I went to Penn State ice cream school after I got out. So the year I got out, I went to that. They have a sort of culinary school for ice cream, but they teach you about some of the business of it as well. And so in all of this time, I've been getting really good at my formulas and my ice cream. So that kicked off this spring, and I just literally made 50 pints of ice cream, hyped it up on Instagram, and they sold out. So then I started selling out 200 pints of ice cream a week. And, now I finally got my business plan together and scored a storefront. So the website.
Congratulations.
Thank you, man. The website will be coming out soon, but the best way is on the Instagram at Be Free Craft Ice Cream altogether.
All righty. Cool. Well, thank you very much. For those, as we're closing off here, you guys can support the channel. You can support the podcast through redactedllc.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at redactedllc. Thank you very much for sharing this with people. This is going to be one of those things we build community by community, communicating with each other by actually making that hard, emotional, deliberate step to say, hey, buddy, and go out and reach across the street or wherever it is, and whatever is the barricade between you and community oftentimes is yourself. Chris, thank you for part of this and reminding us that we may disguise our ego as things that we think we need. Like a need for acceptance might sometimes be the ego getting in the way. So thank you very much for this conversation. I look forward to us talking more in the future. So
Me too.
this has been the Redacted Culture Cast, and I look forward to our next conversation. Take care.